What's up, everyone? We're back for another episode of Locked On Bucks, and over here in Australia, I woke up to some news. Pat Connaughton, surprisingly, I think, has opted into his contract for this season. So that is an interesting discussion point. What does it mean for next season? What does it mean moving forward? What does it mean for Bobby Portis? So we're going to get into that and the draft as we're recording this under 24 hours away, so we can talk about any final talking points from what the Bucks could do. It's also the premiere of Giannis's movie tomorrow or the next day. Frank, the movie buff, on Locked On Bucks. We're going to get his thoughts. Let's get started.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. I'm your host, Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on the show Monday to Friday. Also from my work over at ESPN alongside me, the founder of brewhoop.com and longtime voice of the podcast, Frank Madden. And we have seen this week the interest around the draft for the Bucks is higher than it's been in recent years. And we definitely appreciate everyone for making Locked On Bucks their first listen or first watch of every day. And I should say, as you're preparing for the draft, we had Matt Babcock on the podcast yesterday. He brings a different level of expertise when it comes to these draft prospects than perhaps, I don't want to speak for Frank, but certainly more than me. So if you're looking for some last second prep, listen to that. Also listen to the ultimate mock draft as well. I made my selection. So you've got all the prep you need on the Locked On Network. But Frank, before we get to the draft, this was a surprise for me as I woke up. I had the nice little notification there from Woj telling me that Pat Connaughton, and as I started reading this tweet, I was like, okay, Pat's opted out. Great. Thank you very much. Opted in. Pat has opted into his deal. And it's just a surprise. We've gone through the salary cap stuff, what it could mean for the luxury tax, the added bill that the owners are going to have for putting this team back together or keeping it together. This was a little bit of a shock. How did you take the news? I assume for most, it was a little bit of a surprise.
Yeah, I mean, I was, I think, Brian Sampson, who tweets under the Bucks Film Room account, I think he tweeted something earlier in the day about that this was the decision day for Pat's option, and in my head I was thinking like, oh well, if there's no word on him opting out, then like we should call the cops and do a welfare check on Pat and his agent. Because
did you do that?
Never got around to it. But yeah, similarly, I mean, I saw the tweet from Woj, and my immediate thought was it was like a quote tweet. And I was looking at it, I was like, okay, I got to click on this just to make sure that this is a real Woj, account. It's not like a fake Woj account, which would be like a pretty sad thing to create a fake Woj account to tweet about Pat Connaughton opting in to a player option. Not exactly the highest stakes. But yeah, I mean, like obviously from Pat's perspective, he absolutely would have gotten more on the open market from hopefully the Bucks, right? That was our assumption, was that, we know he obviously has developed close ties in Milwaukee. He's a great fit with the Bucks, great relationship with Giannis and obviously his teammates. He's a guy that I think, obviously we expect to see here for a number of years on. But, I think he would have had competitive offers, maybe not up to the full mid-level, but certainly at least the taxpayer mid-level from somebody, which would have been over $6 million a year. And again, just to, coming off 2 really good years, just to lock in a long-term contract. I think he's 29 years old. So, like you don't want to wait a year and come off like a 32% 3-point shooting season when you're hitting free agency, given the way that, especially you shot last year. But then, you look at it and someone asked me, I forget who it was, someone asked me on Twitter, like maybe a few weeks ago, like if there was any reason for Pat to opt in, like could we extend Pat before, I think the question was about like, could we extend Pat before the end of June, which, if guys have longer than 3-year deals, I think if I remember correctly, it's like basically if you have like, like a 4-year deal, you could extend basically up until, like July 1, like you don't have to wait, right? Like Chris Paul, you guys might remember, I think that was an opt-in, and I think maybe it wasn't the Chris Paul situation. I know he opted in and then was traded to the Rockets. But either way, long story short, he was not eligible to extend right now unless he became a free agent and then re-signed. But he couldn't just sign an extension before July because his contract wasn't long enough. It hasn't even been 2 years since he signed it. But technically after 2 years, if he opted in, then at the 2-year anniversary of that contract signing, which I believe was like on August 29th, 2020, he'd be eligible to extend that contract. And so, of course, I didn't think that was even relevant because this is like, well, why opt in and then wait 2 months and then you extend? Pat, just go get a. You're gonna make more money now if you just opt out and sign a new deal. But the obvious, and presumptive angle to this is not because Pat is just going to play out his deal for 5.7 and then become a free agent next summer, but it's because he can sign an extension in late August. And I don't think we've seen any reporting yet on this, but the obvious reason to do this is because he and the Bucks have discussed the parameters of what that extension will look like when they can sign it, and presumably they will make it worth Pat's while to not get that raise this year, but essentially defer that new contract until next year when the extension would kick in. So I'm very curious to see what that extension will look like. But I have every uh, every belief that they will sign that extension later in August when he becomes officially extension eligible. And I think I was assuming he'd probably get something in the $8 to $9 million a year range for a new contract. So you think about what he's leaving on the table. Is he leaving 2, 3, possibly even $4 million on the table this season in order to opt in and get an extension instead? You'd guess that the Bucks will will make him whole on that. Not dissimilarly from our belief that they probably have an understanding with Bobby Portis from last year that they would make him whole this summer and offer him a big new contract when he hits free agency. So I would expect, again, we'll see what the number is, but maybe it's $9 million. I think it could be up to roughly $12 million starting salary. I don't think it's going to be that much. But again, he's obviously just been a super valuable piece, a guy that was closing games, playing crunch time the last couple years, and obviously was a huge part of that championship team. So the real value, again, if it's $3 million of foregone income this year, huge tax benefit for the Bucks, who, especially if they bring back Bobby, I mean, they're in that like 4.25, roughly $4 per dollar penalty range of the luxury tax. So again, you look at kind of the money given up. Not only is it, call it $3 million less that he's going to make in the salary, but you just multiply that out then by the tax penalty that you would have paid on it. You're talking about a savings well above, $10 million, $12 million for the Bucks for this season. And again, barring something unforeseen, I mean, they're going to be in the tax as long as they're trying to contend with Giannis, which we hope will be for quite a while. So again, pay me now, pay me later. But the tax level is also pretty rapidly rising. So, you have Brook Lopez coming off of his current contract next summer. So again, I think it's a very logical thing from the Bucks to kind of kick the can down the road and again, pocket those savings this year. And obviously, again, as we always say, fans aren't obligated to care about taxes and kind of what the payroll is for the owners. But I think the upside here is that the more money they save on kind of moves like this, then obviously it increases the likelihood that they're able to possibly spend the entire taxpayer mid-level exception, or be more aggressive with other moves, potentially adding salary and trades, things like that. So yeah, I mean, I think this obviously has the potential to be a really nice win-win for the Bucks and for Pat. And so I think kudos to the organization and for Pat, right? Seemingly, again, maybe getting ahead of myself a little bit, but certainly looks like a situation where they're kind of working together to maximize flexibility for this coming season financially, give the Bucks a little break from a tax perspective, and make sure Pat gets taken care of on the back end. And again, obviously the last contract, a lot of people, I mean, including myself, I was like, why do you give him a player option? It would have better just give him 2 years. Obviously, we were all wrong, right? He more than earned his contract. Kudos to Pat. A lot of people that were really aggressively anti that deal obviously had to eat their words. And I mean, again, that's the best possible way to be wrong, right? Is when you think a guy that your own guy got overpaid and then he ends up outplaying it, and in Pat's case, helping you win a championship. So So yeah, a good day, hopefully for everybody.
Yeah, I would say that's one of the hallmarks of this team over the last few years when you think about guys that originally have been underpaid and eventually are going to probably, if you want to keep them, are going to have to get that extension. I know Brook Lopez was a little different situation, but he certainly had it after the first season. You mentioned Bobby Portis, similar situation. You feel like it's coming. You hope it's coming. And then with Pat, but I agree. I'm worrying about that next year. This is good for next season. It seems like, unless they just pocket the savings and say, no, we're not spending any more money anyway. Then, I'd say there would be some kickback from the fan base. But as I've said, when it comes to the spending, there's probably going to be kickback either way. That was big news for today with Pat Connaughton, but I've got some more big news. The only NBA Jam is back. Arcade 1UP, the leader in at-home retro arcade games, is not only bringing back the best game ever, but they've made it bigger with a Shaq edition machine. People are obsessed with NBA Jam, and I'm thrilled to tell our listeners that you can once again play hoops with the NBA Legends in this arcade classic. NBA Legends, not sure if that applied to the old version of the Bucks teams, but either way, you can jump clear across the court and set the ball on fire. It's one of the first ever sports games to feature real and digitized NBA licensed teams. No fouls, no free throws, no quarters required. That's actually not a lie because technically it says no quarters required, but if you go to any bar, you generally need some quarters. But anyway, compete with friends and family through all new Wi-Fi leaderboards, making you more connected than ever. Pre-order now from arcade1up.com. That's arcade, the number one, up.com for an estimated early September ship date. There's other classic games as there. LA Classic Games on the website as well there. And they are giving away an NBA Jam Shaq edition to a Locked On listener. Enter for a chance to win a game console for your man cave at arcade1up.com/lockedon. Unfortunately, not available in Australia. I was trying to do it, but they won't send it out. It's a real blow to me. But you've got until July 8th to enter to win the NBA Jam Shaq edition console. Don't miss out. Enter today.
By the way, I got to give a shout out. I'm wearing my the Leap shirt for subscribing to our friend Peter Bukowski's Packers newsletter. Yes. So I was on Locked On Packers a couple weeks back discussing kind of Giannis versus Aaron Rodgers is in the battle to be the most popular Wisconsin sports athlete, which is a fun debate to have. Amazing that the Bucks actually have a player who could legitimately rival someone as great and as Aaron Rodgers, given the Packers are always the number one in Wisconsin. So had a fun discussion with that. But anyway,
so I just want to quickly say, as someone that didn't grow up in Wisconsin, the idea that Aaron Rodgers could be as likable as Giannis is one of the more laughable comments I've ever heard. And there will be some Packers homers. There'll be some Packers homers. But I'm here to tell you, what a ridiculous comp.
I mean, look, it was not likability, right? It was just popularity.
Okay.
Because clearly Giannis, I said Giannis wins the approval rating war because anybody who knows anything about Giannis loves him. Versus Aaron, let's just say, even with his the heights he reached in his latest MVP season, rubs some people the wrong way. Marches to the beat of his own drum a little bit. Anyway, that we'll let Peter. We'll leave that stuff to Peter to decode Aaron Rodgers. But I, for one, as a Packer fan, I'm happy that Aaron Rodgers is back, and hopefully he ends his career in Green Bay. Doesn't pull a Brett Favre, but it was looking a little dicey on that front there for a while.
Terrific player, no doubt about it. I can safely admit that as someone who really knows nothing about the NFL. Back to the NBA draft though. Tomorrow night, I've mentioned it a few times. Straight after the Bucks make their pick, or who knows what could happen. We can get into that now. But whatever happens, I'll do a quick, it's probably going to be about 10 to 15 minutes interview with someone from Lockdown. It could be Peter Bukowski, one of the channel coordinators. I'll be on with them. They'll put it straight on the Locked On Bucks YouTube channel, which if you're subscribed, you'll see that notification and you'll be able to jump on and have a look at that. And then afterwards, the plan is to do the full show. So Frank's he's invited the whole of Austin to his house for a Rocky Rococo sauce, only the sauce, and draft party. So if I can drag Frank away to the computer, we'll also have Frank. We'll do a normal episode as well. But anyway, the point being, there's going to be plenty to watch there. Now, I've got a guest. I didn't tell you about this. We've got a guest for the podcast right now, Frank. So I'm just going to bring them in here. Fresh off the contract, Pat Connaughton. By the way, this is why you should subscribe to YouTube so you can see what's going on here. But Pat has joined us on the podcast, fresh with a helmet on, an eye patch. He's missing a front tooth. And when you talk about players that have committed their head to the cause, Pat Connaughton certainly high on the list, Frank.
We needs a black eye. You need to kind of color in a
patch?
black eye on. Well, yeah, but I mean both eyes, right? I mean, yeah.
That's true.
Pat has taken his abuse. It really is pretty remarkable. Nobody gets punched in the face, kicked in the face, elbowed in the face, quite as much as Pat Connaughton does. But shout out to Pat, one of the, again, this team has just been full of likable guys, more likable than Aaron Rodgers guys. And by the Pat Connaughton, the quarterback of the Bucks intramural football team, most likely, given that he once upon a time played football and can apparently throw it 80 yards or something. So yeah, shout out to Pat. Good day for Pat. By the way, let me just one note on this as well. Nobody asked me this, but in case anybody's curious, nobody asked me this, but in case anybody's curious, Bobby is not extension eligible in the same way. So if anybody looks at the Pat situation and says like, oh, well, Bobby has a player option, might he opt in and then, extend at some point this summer? He's not extension eligible since he just signed another 1+1, even though he's 2 years into his tenure with the Bucks. There isn't that same kind of angle that he can take. So if Bobby Portis opts in, first off, gross negligence by his agent. But this, but Bucks, we've been lucky as Bucks fans, like we've seen the Bucks duck, some potentially expensive additions, or Bobby Portis just leaving for more money the past 2 off seasons now with Bobby and now Pat sticking around for less money. But yeah, Bobby, the time is coming to pay Bobby Portis, and if the Bucks don't, I don't think anybody's giving him $12 million a year, $15 million a year. But again, I think there could be a market for him, certainly for 8 to 10 million potentially. And so that's why I do expect him to be compensated with some version, most likely I would say, of kind of his starting max is 10.9. And I don't know if it'd go 4 years. I'm kind of hoping it's not a 4-year deal, because that's just a long time. But again, shout out to Bobby, and you can't be mad at Bobby if he gets that bag, even if he gets maybe a little bit overpaid. I think as a Bucks fan, everybody's going to be happy for him to finally get paid, given it's not 2 years in a row that obviously he dramatically outperformed his salary slot.
Yeah, and I think I also this is just my own thoughts, is that clearly I think with these deals and players opting in, you already pointed to it, Frank, at some point they're probably going to want to recoup those funds that they've lost. I joked with you that Pat for next season just gave up more money than I'll earn for the rest of my life. This next, and it's probably not even close. So, I mean, I know they live in a different life to what we are, but it is for a player that it really hasn't been a high-paid player by NBA standards. It's even Bobby Portis was a little bit different. I mean, Bobby Portis had a big contract prior. Pat hasn't. I mean, he was playing for the Bucks for the minimum, for $1.6 million for a couple of years. He got this deal, so he does deserve a payday. But he's also nearly turning 30. So if you did sign him for 4 years, you're talking about 34-year-old Pat Connaughton. So it's interesting to see how this will play out. But I also think, as much as the deal, the handshake that we think the Bucks say, look, we'll take care of you, let's just push it down 12 months. I also just think part of it is they're playing with Giannis. They understand the role that they play in this team. The team's going to be really good. They're playing with a superstar that is going to help make them better. I think that Giannis, obviously, and what he creates with this team, obviously deserves a lot of credit. Let's get back to the draft. So, as I said, we're under 24 hours away here. We don't exactly know what the Bucks are going to do. But one thing that was at least a little bit interesting, and I guess I've been trying to wrap my head around how it would even be possible. There was a report that came out, I believe it was Scotto, who, which, by the way, sounds like an Aussie if you call him Scotto.
Michael Scotto?
Yeah, Scotty came up with the report that said that the Bucks were potentially one of the teams kicking the tires on trading up to pick 14, which I believe is Cleveland's. I don't know how. Any
Well, and
thoughts on this?
Jonathan, I think Jonathan Givony at ESPN in his mock also referenced the Bucks, something about the Bucks making calls essentially to trade up.
To trade
And then
up, yeah.
he then I think it was that rival teams, I think it was framed as rival teams reported the Bucks as making calls to move up into, you know, the teens, and then added on to that, I think it was somewhat speculation from Jonathan Givony that they might be looking to move up to draft a big man. And, you know, again, um, everybody clutched their pearls. I think we never really talk about Mark Williams because we've just been assuming he's gone. So I don't like have some hatred of Mark Williams. I think Walker Kessler, a lot of our listeners have, you know, a strong aversion to drafting Walker Kessler. I mean, you know, his headshot looks like a goober, you know, the headshot is kind of tough, you know, looks like a goober from, you know, Auburn. But basically the best shot blocker of the last decade, just in terms of like block percentage, which is like the percentage of shots that a guy blocks when he's on the floor. And actually, I think the stat, I forget who pulled the stat, but it was may have been Sam Vecini, that I think it was actually Sam Vecini in the article Eric posted today. But I think he had the highest block rate since Larry Sanders in 2009, I think was the stat, or whatever it was. So yeah, there you go. But yeah, so it was just a weird, you know, it was a weird couple data points to hear that from two people saying that the Bucks are looking to trade up. And then the double whammy is, well, I don't know that I think fans usually are excited about the prospect of their team trading up, right? But then to hear the suggestion that it might be to draft, you know, a guy that in Walker Kessler that most fans wouldn't want them drafting at 24.
So what? So what could they even do, Frank?
I mean, that was my point. My reaction, I tweeted this earlier, was, I mean, there's a few reasons why this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Like, first off, like, what are you giving up to move up from 24 to, you know, 14 or something like that, in that range? I mean, you have to give up a lot, right? And the irony was, I was kind of looking, I was like, man, the Bucks never trade up. Like, when was the last time they did this? And they did it 3 times between 95 and 2000. 95, they traded a future first, and I think I forget what it was. I think it was the 10th pick, Gary Trent, for Sean Respert, who was, I believe, picked
Gary Trent
8th, I think. So to move up a few spots in the lottery, they traded a future first. I forget where that pick ended up being. Did not work out at all. I remember being excited about by the way, because Sean Respert was such an awesome scorer in college. But, you know, 14-year-old me, apparently not the savviest draft analyst. And then 98, of course, the infamous trade up from 9 to 6. I think they gave up a pick in the teens, which turned into Pat Garrity. And of course, you know, Nelly scammed the Bucks because he could have picked Dirk at 6, and instead he got the Bucks to trade up. He took Dirk at 9, and the Bucks got Robert Tractor Trailer, who obviously never panned out.
What did Dirk do anything?
I don't know. I never heard what happened to him after Dallas. Never got out of there, I guess.
After Dallas.
And then 2000, which I had totally forgotten about this, but they gave up, I believe, another future first. And I think it was the 15th pick, which turned into Jason Collier. Oh, what could have been? I think he was 15th. They basically traded the 15th pick, and I think a future first, for Joel Persbilla, the Vanilla Gorilla, number 9. So yeah, the Bucks basically had like 3 just absolutely disastrous trade ups in the span of, I guess, 6 drafts, and they haven't tried it in the 22 years since. So
so they think they may as well trade up for another big man. See if they can. Third time's a charm.
Well, hey, Sean Respert was an undersized 6'1" shooting guard, so, you know, you're damned if you do. It doesn't work either way. But yeah, just a strange move, because like, what do you have to give up, right? It's not like you have multiple second-round picks this year to sweeten it, or a late first or something like that to move up that amount. You can't move a first-round pick unless you give up. They technically, after the draft, will be able to trade their 2029 first-round pick.
I hope I'm
but
still
again,
around.
It's like,
jeez.
It's that we're not going to be podcasting. But
far out.
We'll be done. But again, it's like, I mean, are they like, that's like literally the last first round pick that they can trade? Like, is that really what they're going to do it for? Another guy who, you know, regardless of who it is, probably doesn't help you this year. And I think you do want to keep powder dry, whether it's second round picks, that 2029 pick, you know, the few guys, Grayson Allen, whatever it is that you have on your roster, you do want to keep some assets that you could potentially move for players to upgrade the roster this year. So yeah, it's just kind of like a weird thing that just really to me doesn't match their MO at all. And again, it's silly season. Like, the Bucks could have called up those other teams literally just to get people talking about the Bucks looking to trade up to throw them off the scent, when in reality they're looking to trade out or trade down or whatever it might be. So for anybody like panicking about that report about the center stuff, I wouldn't read much into it. I also would say I really don't know what direction they might go if they keep that pick, or if they draft later, for instance, if they trade down in the second round. Honestly, nothing would surprise me. Like there was the leak about how Jake LaRavia from Wake Forest has been in twice, but apparently there's been other guys that have been in twice, and they just haven't been advertised because their agents didn't need to advertise that, because for Jake LaRavia, it's probably a big deal to be come in twice for the team with the number 24 pick versus other guys. Maybe you want to go higher, so you don't necessarily leak that kind of thing. So, again, I think back to the good old days of like the mid 2000s where, the reports would be of like, oh, the Bucks, Herb Cole went out to dinner with a prospect, like, oh, it's getting serious, right? I don't know if that's the equivalent these days of this, but again, honestly, 24 hours before the draft, this podcast, the day before the draft podcast, always ages like milk, because a bunch of stuff is about to happen. They may make trades. Obviously, that those trades may include this pick, and whoever we would project is probably going to be wrong. So I honestly don't know. I also think I don't know, if you're the draft newsbreakers, the Bucks really aren't that interesting of a team because they're at 24. They only have one pick. And again, I don't know that, especially the way that the Bucks keep a pretty tight ship, right? I mean, most of the big moves they've made have not been very telegraphed. Like the PJ Tucker trade was actually pretty interesting because we sort of heard about their interest in PJ for probably a couple months. And I remember always thinking oh, what exactly are you giving up in that trade, right? And then they found a very creative way to make that deal happen. But I think for the most part, whoever they pick, if they pick somebody on Thursday night, will probably, again, there's enough guys that it could be, and you're so far down the draft, you don't know who's really going to be available. So I have no idea. I think we've both gone on record as saying, we'd rather have a wing / bigger guard / kind of combo forward type guy, just because of the potential for that guy to, be more projectable to being a playoff caliber type player down the road, just positionally. But again, I think just calibrate expectations. Whoever they pick almost certainly won't be good next year, and probably won't be good ever. We hate to say it. But the odds of hitting on a future starter late in the first round are not high. And again, the draft's fun. I mean, we kind of had to, as Bucks fans, I think, sort of live off of the dream of what could be for a very long time. And you never know. You never know when that 15th pick turns into a 2-time MVP and a franchise savior. So anything can happen. And again, I think I just at this point try to minimize my expectations. A lot of the guys that I was most interested in have predictably now become the guys that almost certainly will not be available, right? The Jalen Williams, Tari Easons, those type of guys. So I'm fully expecting a guy that I'm not super excited about. And I think let me ask you this, because I tweeted a little bit about sort of potential trade down scenarios, and we've talked a little bit about this in the past, but I mean, do you have an expectation? Is there a kind of probability distribution in your head of you think there's a X% chance they keep the pick, Y% chance that they trade down, Z% chance that they trade out of the draft entirely? How are you sort of calibrating your expectations for what happens Thursday night?
No, I think there'll be a rookie on the roster this time tomorrow when we're podcasting. Whether it is at 24 or it is a second, I don't know. John Horst likes trading. He likes doing stuff, and I think we always, and I'm always, even though for multiple seasons I was in all the press conferences, I still say, you take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, particularly around this time of year. And John certainly didn't. I mean, put it this way: he could have easily watered it down and said, just played a straight bat and said, "Oh, we're looking forward to like having a rookie. We can do some stuff with the 24th pick." And he was just like, "I'm always looking to do stuff. Who knows? We could move it." And I'm like, okay. In some ways, it's kind of just typical John. But I think they'll have a rookie. But certainly trading down wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. And I think part of the reason for that, as we've kind of discussed, again, without admittedly being an expert in all this, from what you read, from the people you talk to that know far more about it than me, they seem to believe that whether it's in the mid 30s or it's in the mid 20s, there's such a long list of guys that are kind of interesting, and most of them won't work out. But maybe you get lucky, and who knows?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, ultimately, like the biggest unknown is just like obviously what the Bucks draft board looks like and the level of conviction they have in that draft board, and like, and that's the whole idea of like the idea of trading up. You got to really want a guy and really think that guy is going to be good to give up, multiple picks to make a move up, right?
So if the Bucks traded up, the guy we spoke about a lot, if the Bucks traded up to 16, don't even know who's got the pick, but if they traded up to 16 and drafted Jalen Williams, would you go to sleep tomorrow night feeling happy?
I mean, I like Jalen Williams enough that I would be happy with that. I think there are a few guys like Jalen Williams, Tari Eason, that I could certainly spin it up to myself that it's an exciting thing, and those guys have enough real upside and a realistic enough chance of being like real contributors by, let's say, year 2, that okay, hey, here's a guy that could be kind of like, maybe he is that. Again, I'm not going to say like, oh, that's going to be like the Chris Middleton sort of / Drew like replacement as Giannis's number 2 4 or 5 years from now, but at a minimum, a guy that could be hopefully at least a high level role player while on his rookie contract in year 2, 3, 4, and potentially more, right? Potentially a good starter or something like that, right? And again, I mean, Malcolm Brogdon became that type of player, basically by year 2, right? I mean, year 1 he was a starter, right? I mean, kind of crazy to think the Bucks had 2 rookie starters that year against Toronto between Brogdon and Thon Maker, right? I mean, that's extremely rare. I don't know how many times that's happened, to be honest. Certainly rare to go past the first round with that type of configuration. So there are definitely guys that I could talk myself into being excited about. But again, like, do the Bucks have anybody that they evaluate as being that special relative to everybody else that you're willing to give up, picks that you could otherwise be using to add veterans that are definitely going to, be factors for you next year? That's where just sort of that opportunity cost, I think, becomes really steep for the Bucks versus, if you're a team that's in a very different position, doesn't have that same pressure to win now, or you've got a ton of picks or something like that. Like, it's not as big a deal to make a trade up like that. So I think, to me, it all starts with the, kind of the evaluation. And obviously at the end of the day, it just seems like the Bucks have not had a lot of conviction in the guys that were available when they were drafting, really since the Dante draft, right? Because they essentially haven't had a first round pick that they've kept since then. And so, do they see 5 guys as roughly comparable and they'll just take whoever's available at 24? Or do they say, you know what, like, there's like 2 or 3 guys that we think are going to be available at like the low 30s. So let's just kind of trade back, and then, we feel comfortable enough that one of those guys is going to be there, right? That's obviously the risk, because, if you're trading 24 to go back, you can't pick a player for yourself. Generally, you typically are trading it and picking a guy for that other team, or then you have to guess who they might like. So, there's gambles obviously either way, but I think the other part that I think, to me, what most closely matches sort of the MO would be a trade down involving, you get like an early second round pick this year, and then you get maybe a future second or a couple future seconds, maybe even depending on the quality of those seconds, because that's kind of the ultimate compromise move. Because I think you mentioned it earlier, like you look at the roster's going to fill up pretty quickly, but there is room to kind of add a young guy. There's obviously a rationale for adding a young guy, just again to see if you can develop somebody that pops and maybe is part of that longer term core. You haven't had that obviously the last few years with the likes of Jordan Wara or obviously Mamu last year, right? It was kind of a tall bill given where he was picked, but maybe you do take a flyer and you kind of roll the dice. You hopefully find that diamond in the rough, and if you get a guy in the early second round, then they don't come with the rookie scale salary slot, which is always going to be higher than a rookie minimum. So the rookie minimum this year is basically exactly $1 million. If they stay at 24, they'll have to pay that rookie $2.5 million, which again, 1.5 million, like, well, what's the big deal, right? It's not a big difference. But given where the Bucks are likely to be in the tax, again, there's this 4x penalty basically on the dollar for dollar at that point. So again, looking at everything on the margin kind of, is always going to make you feel like, oh, we shouldn't do anything, right? Well, we got to just save our money because everything's so expensive on the margin. But, in practice, like that's the reality, I think, for these teams, how they look at it. And so again, if you pay the number 24, 2.5 million versus just 1 million, there's the 1.5 million that you're spending just on the salary, but then there's basically a 4 times multiplier on that for the tax. So $6 million plus, call it $1.5 million, well over $7 million in net incremental cost to take a guy at number 24 versus get a guy, say, in the early 30s. And then obviously if you get another future second round pick next year, you're obviously not paying for that this year. And probably the most important thing, and the reason why this isn't just like a pure, like, oh, they're just being cheap type thing, is, well, that second round pick or multiple second round picks, you can roll that into a trade at the deadline or this summer. We saw them do it last year with the Grayson Allen move. They picked up a couple seconds on draft night, and then lo and behold, not long thereafter, they end up trading for a guy that obviously started most of the year for them. And, with the exception, obviously, of the Boston series, was a good player for them and played really well, obviously, against Chicago as well. So, so I think, to me, like that, that the trade down for the second plus a future, something in the future, is the split the difference type move that gives you that rookie this year, gives you that dice roll this year, also gives you some future optionality as far as potentially trading that for, as part of other deals. And then you don't have to, so there's a reason to do it just for the value perspective. And then the way you sell it to ownership is you say, oh, by the way, we're going to save, $7.5 million by doing this. And hey, that maybe increases, if you're John Horst, the ability to go back and say, hey, let's use the full mid-level rather than just part of it or something like that in free agency. So again, the finance stuff, nobody likes talking about that as fans, but I think it's always overhanging all this stuff, right? And so I think it could come into play. And I know we talked a lot about sort of what trade options there might be if they were just to trade the pick with Grayson Allen, with George Hill. Like, we've kind of covered that previously. Obviously, they could go in a bunch of different directions that way. I personally, again, like, I don't see a lot of guys with the trade market. I feel like there's a good chance you don't really get a player much better than Grayson Allen, and you just had to give up a first round pick to do it. So I'm a little wary of making a move like that. Again, unless it's like, if it's like Josh Hart, okay, that's one thing. But Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, like, I don't want to give up a first round pick to get Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, right? So we'll see what happens. But a lot of different directions the Bucks can go. I think that's the bottom line. And I'd say we probably both feel like it's more likely they trade down or out than trade up. I think that would be the safe bet. But I think there's also, maybe not a greater than 50% chance, but, I don't know, 40% chance they keep the pick, something like that. I don't know if I was having to swag some likelihoods. Maybe it's 40% keep the pick, 40% trade down, and I don't know, 5%, 3% trade up, and maybe the remainder goes to kind of trade out entirely. That's my off the cuff probability distribution. So I asked you didn't give me one, so I have to make one up myself.
That's some Bill Simmons stuff from you right there with your percentages. By the way, and you, like you said, these podcasts generally age like milk, so we're going to wrap this up because there's no need to go any further. But just to your point,
I love milk, by the way. I mean, I do love milk, but
I actually was having cereal this morning, didn't check the milk, and I literally did have old milk this morning, but I'm still here to tell the tale. So
By the
shout out
way,
to me.
one weird thing about me, I like to drink milk with pizza, which is just crazy dairy overload. But I feel like that's like a very Wisconsin thing to do. So tomorrow night, I'm gonna have via 313 pizza, Detroit style pizza, the best in Austin because I can't get Rockies. And then I have my Rocky sauce. So I'm gonna dip the pizza in Rocky sauce. Shout out to Rockies, and I'll probably be drinking some milk with that. So judge me. Feel free to judge me.
I will, and I don't even care how people, if they get offended by this, because I know milk drinkers get weird about this. But Eric doesn't listen to the podcast, so I'm fine to say this. But when I was still in Milwaukee, went to Eric Name's family house. Which, by the way, lovely family house. They got there. We sat down.
Slinger.
Out in the Slinger. I don't know whether that's I don't really. Anyway, whatever. And we sat down to have dinner, and Eric had a glass of milk with his dinner. Which to me, like, Eric, you're not a baby, okay? Have a glass of water or have a wine or a beer or something, but you don't need a glass of milk like with your dinner, like an absolute infant, just childish behavior from Eric Name. So anyway, I've never actually told him that. So again, luckily he doesn't.
What kind of milk was he drinking? Is he a 2% guy? He feels like a 2% guy.
Don't know.
I drink skim milk, by the way.
That's because you're an athlete.
I feel like maybe that makes it a little more understandable because it's kind of more watered down. But my dad had high cholesterol when I was growing up, so we just only had skim milk, and I prefer the flavor. So there you go.
All right, check out the ultimate Locked On mock draft if you've got any time left before the draft as you're listening to this. And by the way, once you got through the milk chat, if you still want to go back to the basketball chat, go to Locked On Ultimate mock draft. By the way, a few people asked, not on YouTube, audio platform, old school. Chuck it on the old phone or the old Walkman or whatever, the wireless. Chuck it on the wireless. And you'll be able to listen to that. I picked Ty Washington Jr., by the way, who I don't think is going to be there at 24. He's a guard. Also, he was just there. I think he's mocked under 15, and I was like, that seems like good value. But by the way, we'll get to this. But I'm only bringing this up.
Could you pick him out of a lineup? Do you know what he looks like?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Is he kind of chubby looking for an elite athlete? He's not a great athlete, right?
I never
watched any stuff on him, so I can't really comment. This is the depth of my draft scouting.
From looking at him, I would have to say he's a skim milk drinker.
Oh, okay. He's an athlete. Okay.
He's an athlete. He's about to be an NBA athlete. All right. This is out of control. Like I said, we'll be back after the draft. Subscribe to YouTube. You'll get the notifications. We'll be back after the draft. Could be fun. Who knows what's going to happen? With Frank and myself, we'll see you guys after the draft.